Climate tech startups, what works and what doesn't. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.
All right, Dan, nice to talk with you today. This is part 2, so a second episode about what works and what doesn't work with climate tech startups. In our first episode, we talked about a number of companies that had made good decisions and bad decisions as they were growing. The conversations had to do with leadership and culture, market sizing and go-to-market strategy, product velocity and direction, and unit economics. And in this episode, we're going to talk about operational scaling, capital stack, competition, and some regulatory work. So, Dan, you've been involved with a bunch of startups over time, and you've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. Tell me a little bit about Solstice as an example of a company that does operational scaling well. And by that, what I mean is they have scaled their product, aka their service, and their customer experience over time. I know you know Solstice and Sanjay Murali and Steph Spears. So tell me a little bit about what you know about operational scaling and how they've been able to scale up that organization.
Well, I have to admit, I'm glad you used the word operational scaling, because I don't even know what that kind of term means until you describe it. And so I sort of always learn from the business side of this world what are the shorthands for what on the academic side we often say in much more roundabout and less precise ways. So Solstice to me is a really interesting company that did a lot of things right and does a lot of things right. And the starting point is to have a great product, and that is they want to get solar in the hands of individuals who aren't just doing solar on big buildings, big factories, big homes. They're trying to really democratize solar. And so from my perspective, the most exciting thing that Solstice has done is to really think hard about what does it take to get a lot of players in the field. And I think that they are millions of subscribers now, maybe almost 3 million subscribers. They have a number, over 60 local projects. And what's most interesting to me is that it's kind of peer-to-peer learning among their prospective clients, meaning what's worked, what have you learned about sort of navigating your local regulation, what are issues about roofing permits, or is it better in this or that location to think about ground-mounted solar systems or this or that. And I feel like that network to network, I would say peer-to-peer in the academic side, is something that solar really needs, because while the product looks simple, and it actually is simple, navigating not just regulation, but which products, which aspects of your local building code is most critical, all of those things can really get in the way of something that otherwise could be simple. And Solstice seems to have really figured out, kind of doing the Craigslist, the eBay, the TikTok, whatever you want to call it, of communication to their current and prospective clients. So that's what I really love about their ethos.
Great. So I'm going to say a little bit more, Dan, about that. So we're using Solstice as an example for operational scaling, but let's talk about what Solstice does. So Solstice, basically what they say they do is they make community solar accessible for all. Very quickly, what community solar is you as a homeowner, whether you're a low-income holder, a low-income renter, anybody, you can buy, quote unquote, the electricity generated from a large solar plant. And you can go to Solstice's website to learn more about it. But essentially, even if you have a roof that has shading in it, or you don't even own your property that you live in, you can get access to the electricity generated from a big solar system somewhere far away. And so I like Solstice and what Sanjay Murali and Steph Spears have done from an operational scaling perspective is because they've been able to keep the customer experience despite all of the things you're talking about, Dan. There's complexity in regulations in New Mexico versus New York versus Illinois. The sales process can be complex, and it's been a multi-year process for Solstice, but they've done a very good job with automating as much as they can, keeping headcount low, assessing their operations maturity, and dedicating resources to making the operations a source of competitive advantage.
And so I guess for me, this is the one point that I'm going to lean into jargon, which sounds weird because I hate jargon, I hate acronyms. But in my view, what Solstice is doing is not just kind of finding ways to make solar ubiquitous, but they are kind of the leading edge, the gateway drug, whatever you want to call it, for one of the things that I kind of think and hope will define the energy world in the future. And that's under this category of VPPs, talk about acronym, a virtual power plant, meaning you don't have to be physically connected to your customer or the members of a peer-to-peer sales network or whatever. Don't have to be physically connected. Electrons go onto the grid. They can be tracked. They can be bought and sold. And so one nice feature, and the idea of this VPP is one producer might be aggregating or selling the product of solar. Another might be aggregating or selling energy efficiency via some demand side management, meaning there are incentives for you to cut back at a given time of day so that that energy is available. And demand side management is an interesting, complicated term that we'll return to later. But this idea that everyone can be a producer and a consumer, depending on time of day and what you have, and the total nerdy word for that is prosumer. But virtual power plants, VPPs, are where I hope that the kind of Solstice lessons are going. So I view them as a really important leading edge of what in 10 years could be quite ubiquitous.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so we've talked a bunch about operational scaling. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of startups is capital stack and raising money. So climate tech startups historically that have successfully scaled and raised multiple rounds often do a few things well. They diversify their capital stack, they plan for different types of capital needs, and they approach sort of de-risking raising money by looking at different financial sources.
And you got to tell me what, as an ignorant person, what de-risking raising money means, because the idea of raising money is risking. So tell me what that
raising money is always risky. I think that, very simply, it's can you get grant money? Can you get VC money? Can you get loans that you can repay easily? And this is particularly important, it was important for the Solstices of the world when they were really young, but I'm talking about early companies that are still at the bench or just getting past the bench and are trying to figure out how to commercialize their technology. And so what I'm trying to underscore here is trying to find different pools of capital beyond venture is really important. And, the founders that are listening right now should be trying to look at government incentives or grants to the extent that they exist anymore, loans from banks that are providing, low interest rate loans to early stage startups, insurance products, long-term offtake agreements. So you might not necessarily be making money, but you're going to be able to sell your widget to a Fortune 500 company for the long term. All of those things are helping you as a startup to have enough money to continue getting to the next day.
Right. And the buzzword for that process or that bridging with a known customer down the road or a secure agreement is getting over the so-called valley of death, meaning you have a great idea, you get a little bit of money, but you're not profitable. You burn that money up at some kind of rate. And how do you get your good idea into some sustainable operation so that people are buying it, your service is evolving? And that's this infamous valley of death that everyone who studies this process both they say good ideas can go to die there, but also bad ideas can persist if they have too much money at the wrong stage. So the Valley of Death has all kinds of kind of analyses and books and movies and all kinds of things about it. But it's really the issue that you're highlighting. How do you get your good idea through the shaky early days to be something that's sustainable?
So, what I'm going to bring up as an example in terms of doing a good job with managing their capital stack is actually a tiny company called Liatris, Liatris. Their website is liatris.biz. And Frank Yang, who is a friend of mine, and full disclosure, the Maryland Momentum Fund invested in Frank Yang several years ago. What Liatris does is they are building a new insulation that is a competitor to steel wool that's more efficient and higher insulating than other technologies that exist in the market today. So I love the concept. The primary incumbent options that exist today are like fiberglass, mineral wool, foam insulation, resulted from development efforts in the 1950s to replace asbestos. And so creating a new chemistry and new technology makes a ton of sense. And the thing that I'm very impressed with in terms of Frank Yang and Liatris is that he has raised money. He's gotten grant money from the state. He's gotten money from the university system because his business partner is associated with the University System of Maryland. He's gotten a bunch of different funding from R&D organizations and Department of Energy and NIST. Now, who knows how long a lot of that money is going to be available in the long term. And then the other thing that he did, which I thought was so smart, is that he developed a partnership with Stowe, STO, which is the incumbent in the insulation space in the United States, and basically signed a long-term agreement with them such that Stowe will buy his product if it performs X, Y, and Z as required.
Yeah, and I think this is key because often the incumbent can look so big and scary that there's really no pathway that you see to get through it. This is an interesting example of kind of working with that. And you sort of hope that what happens is that both Liatris does well, but also it moves the needle for the industry overall to better, cheaper, more sustainable materials. It's a little bit like the hopeful pathway to go from lithium ion batteries in our phones and our cars to lithium phosphate or whatever comes after that, because that allows us to get cobalt out of the supply chain for the many problems cobalt has today in terms of where we access it, child labor issues, environmental issues. So moving the needle for a field is, of course, everyone's goal. But here's actually a case where those elements might seem to be in play because they are in partnership with the leading actor.
Perfect. Okay, so thus far we've talked about operational scaling and capital stack. The next thing I want to talk about is competition. So, a huge root cause of startup challenges is competitive dynamics, and you either don't understand the incumbent well enough or you don't partner with them well enough. And startups almost always underestimate the power of entrenched competitors. So in this example, and Dan, I'm sure you have many others, I'm going to bring up Charger Help, which is a company based in LA that literally provides operations and maintenance for electric vehicle chargers all over the country. So what did they see? They saw that at any given time, 25% of chargers in the United States are not functioning. So developing a product where they can literally provide operations and get those electric vehicle chargers up and running is a super valuable service.
It sure is. And, as we see failure modes for lots of things in the world, but vehicle charging is not immune from them, even though I'd like to think it's far simpler than ever filling your car with gasoline. But the idea that you're going to have chargers where people treat them roughly because they're not their own, or people trying to smash their adapter into it because they're frustrated that their vehicle doesn't have the right one. All of those things lead to all kinds of charger issues. And so a company that can not only fill the niche of we will repair these things, we will refurbish, upgrade, but also we will be a bit of an interface with quite frankly, often cranky users. And when you can't charge your vehicle, people do tend to freak out. Not any more than people when they can't get gas for their car, but you want to be on the move, you haven't downloaded the app, you haven't looked to see at this site how many of the chargers are working. There's a lot of reasons why people kind of act slightly irrational when they can't get what they want.
One of the things I really like about Charger Help is that they are dedicated to the operations and maintenance of electric vehicle chargers, but they also work with utilities, the original equipment manufacturers or the OEMs, the car manufacturers, the Fords and the Nissans of the world. They work with network operators, they work with the installers of the EV chargers and with resellers. And I just think that's very smart from a competitive vantage point.
Yeah, so I'll do the other end of the spectrum. I'm going to talk about a big company and how they are also kind of adaptive. And it's a Chinese company, CATL, which makes batteries. And what I find most interesting about them is that they were a original lithium ion battery manufacturer, meaning the battery that's in your laptop, in your cell phone, in your car. But they saw pretty early on the limitations of these gel or liquid type batteries. And they moved into the world of solid state batteries. And solid state batteries have a lot of cool properties. On the material science side, you can make them from often easier to access, less environmentally destructive materials. They also have a longer life. And so what CATL has done is taken a leading position in the next generation while still selling the current generation batteries. So the latest advertisements that you can see from this company is that with their new solid state batteries, they can charge you up to 260 miles of new range in under 10 minutes. And others think they can go even faster. And that's, of course, less time than it takes almost any human, except for a 4-year-old boy, to go to the bathroom. So anybody else at a charging location needs more time than that just to do their business, which is important, right? We need to think about the user experience. But CATL is selling the current, but also pioneering in what's next. So I feel like that is a really thoughtful view of how do you think about competition. They are, in some sense, their own competition.
So, all right. So, Dan, thus far, we have talked about operational scaling. We've talked about capital stack. We've talked about competition. All of those things can make or break an early stage startup or any stage company, frankly. The last thing, which we know very well can make or break companies, is regulation and regulatory risk and policy. There's two sides of the same coin, and I'm preaching to the choir with anybody who's listening who does regulatory affairs as a career. Like, insufficient regulatory engagement can cause a lot of trouble for companies. If you didn't know that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to go away, you are completely blindsided by all of that new regulatory risk. And there's political risk as well. So it's really easy to underestimate the complexity of regulatory systems, the variations between jurisdictions, the variations between utilities, the rate at which policies change. And, this is sort of meant to be a cautionary tale for any startup, saying that, you really do need to be engaging with regulators at the federal, state, and local levels early and often. Here, I'm going to bring up an example of a couple companies that have handled regulatory change really well, including the capital markets companies Reunion and Crux. So basically, those companies are taking tax credits from projects and selling those tax credits to entities that need the tax credits, to investors that need the tax credits. They help developers and manufacturers and investors navigate the regulatory complexities of clean energy tax credits, essentially. So given the regulatory complexity, these businesses have made money by handling that regulatory complexity.
So I'm going to jump to the other end of the spectrum because a company you wouldn't expect would have troubles with the regulation because they're so massive. And that's the Ford Motor Company. And some of our audience might remember when the Ford F-150, which is the EV Ford truck, came out. It's called the Ford Lightning. It's got a very cool lights on the front and back to distinguish it from other Ford trucks. They had a very, very, very successful advertisement right after the Super Bowl where they had President Biden in a Ford 150 Lightning truck highlighting the issues. And the cool feature is not just that it was an early electric or EV truck on the market, it was that it has a feature that I think in 5 years is going to be required for every EV, but it's not yet. And that is so-called vehicle to grid capacity, meaning your vehicle can either buy power from the grid or sell power into it. And it turns out that the electronics and the sensors are pretty simple to do. You need roughly $30 worth of parts in your vehicle so that it can track in a smart way which direction the power is flowing and can record it so you either pay or you get paid. Well, it turns out for a whole bunch of reasons that utilities have been amazingly resistant to the idea of vehicle to grid.
Correct.
I think it scares them at a fundamental level, and I think that the operational side really has them perplexed, even those that can do it technically. And so here's a case where it's hard to think of a much bigger company in the space than Ford. They had a great product, great idea, but without really sitting down with those utilities and then the utilities regulators, the world wasn't ready for their product. It still sells, but I would have thought it was selling 10 times higher than it is today because of this unique flexibility. You drive your vehicle to grid, vehicle to a work site, and you can plug in your power tools to it. Or you drive your vehicle to work, and when you're not driving, a smart little chip in it will tell you, the cost of power is high. Let me sell power out of my battery and make money. All of those things are in the world to come, but they're technically possible today, but they're definitely not being market supported today.
Completely agreed. And there's been a bunch of startups that have not had success with vehicle to grid. If Ford can't do it, then nobody could do it, right? So,
well, I'm gonna push back there. I think you're right in terms of they should be able to do it, but oftentimes, even if the product sure seems like it resonates with a big company can do, it's often the small, nimble one that does it, takes the risks, and then either gets acquired or sets a new standard. So you'd
that's
like
the
to
hope.
think that Ford would always do it, but I'm excited about this space, the kind of the startup learning world, precisely because it has to be and can be, and I think always will be more nimble than these big boys.
Thank you for listening to us today about what works and what doesn't work with climate tech startups, large and small. This is Energy Matters with Claire
and Dan.